Well, welcome to another session of Black History Conversations. And I'm going to introduce Sarah Parks in a moment, who's going to share with us some of the stories and challenges that she's faced. And that's something that we've been looking at. So I'm going to just explain, though, that the Black History Conversations started in October 2020, when so many of us around the world were in lockdown. I'm actually in Australia. I've not been able to get back to Wales. And at that time, we wanted to share stories from different community research groups. Simon Faringo from Belong Nottingham had been doing research into Black people who'd lived in Nottingham with his refugee and asylum seeker organisation. And that research was, he'd shared at our conference. Also, I'd got to know David Alston, who's been researching slaves and Highlanders for his book, which is now published. And we decided that we'd try running lunchtime conversations, just an hour and a half or so, for the 5 sessions in October, rather than try and run a Zoom all-day conference. We thought that would be too much. So we started, and after the 5 weeks, we carried on, and we've had all sorts of interesting speakers from universities, authors, creative artists, and a whole range of people. So the website is www.spanglefish.com/Black History. The Spanglefish team are really great, and they're based in Cromarty, where David Alston's from. And his website, which there's reference to on our website, was what attracted me to find out what he was doing, because it's just so informative. So that gives you a little bit of background. But now, without any further ado, Sarah, I'm going to ask you to share with us your thoughts and engage us in a conversation today. Thanks ever so much for joining us, Sarah.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. So for those who don't know me, I'm Sarah Parks, and I am a mom, a speaker, an author, and a legacy coach. And what I do work-wise is I help soul-led entrepreneurial change makers create and grow a profitable online business without sacrificing their family life. So that is what my passion is. And I have a background in working with people around business and parenting. So that's kind of been brought all of that together. And yeah, I suppose I'm here partly because I have written a book which is about legacy. So I've written a book that is called Awakening Legacy, and it's 12 author stories to help unleash your purpose. And of course, you can't engage, or I can't really engage in thinking about and writing about legacy without thinking about where my history, where I've come from and where I am now, and what it is I'm wanting to create in the world, what it is, the impact I'm wanting to have, that I'm, wanting to be part of, because I very much believe that our legacy is something that we're creating in every moment, whether we're conscious about it or not. What will be left behind when we're not here anymore is being created in every day right now. And so I'm passionate about empowering people to be conscious of that and be thinking about, what it is they're doing. So yeah, through writing this book, I thought about what came before. And for me, I have felt more kind of connected with and interested in finding out about my ancestors. And the book, you know, my chapter in the book, it isn't particularly about Black history, although being mixed race, it's about my history, you know, it's about my journey through life. And one of the things in terms of my journey, really, I suppose, is that I very much grew up disconnected, feeling quite disconnected from the Black community and my history, really, you know, in that way. So I grew up in Wales. I grew up in mid Wales, in a very rural area. And when I was growing up, there was my mum, my sister, and myself. And my mum is originally from Jamaica. And there was another family, a guy, I think he was from Jamaica as well, actually, and he had 2 children and his partner. And that was it in terms of the Black community in that area. And I think there were the people who ran the Chinese restaurant, and they were the other part of that the diversity in the area when we were growing up. So, and for various reasons, I suppose, I sort of grew up not particularly connected with my grandmother, you know, my mum's mum, who also lived in Wales, and that's to do with you know, family dynamics, family things, you know. But it did, you know, mean that being in a rural area in mid Wales, the family that I had in this country from Jamaica, I didn't have a lot of contact with. So I had a lot of family in London area, but I you know, didn't see them very often and didn't have a lot of contact with them. So, you know, that's kind of interesting for then your sense of identity, you know, and that this connection with sort of my family, but also my Black history. So I've really feel like I grew up quite disconnected from it. And, you know, more recently, I suppose, I've also noticed, which I think is a connection with, I think it's a connection with slavery and being separated, having families separated. But I've noticed within my family, and I suspect this might be a you know, a common thing. I've sort of noticed families, well, within my family, you know, my mum, my grandmother came to the UK, and my mother stayed in Jamaica, and then she came a few years later. So she was separated from her mother for a few years, and then she came to this country. And, you know, I see that pattern repeated, this separation, you know, and children separated from parents. And I suppose for me that's, and for me growing up, I had a time when I was separated from both of my parents as well for a couple, well, it was probably just under a year, but obviously I was quite young, so it felt like a long time, it felt like years, you know. So I had a time when I was separated from both my families, when this is before the age of 7, and I know from the work that I do with parents and parenting and attachment parenting and all of that side of parenting, that those first 7 years in our lives is when, you know, when we're developing ideas of how the world is, what's possible and what's not possible, what's possible for us, who we are, our identities, all of that stuff is so important in those first 7 years of our lives. And, you know, having that disconnection in that first 7 years, well, it's the opposite of kind of attachment parenting, which is something that I'm quite passionate about, actually, is that building those strong attachments and that security and that safety, which of course people didn't have, you know, slaves didn't have. In our, you know, in our history, that just wasn't there. And, you know, people were separated, but so I'm kind of curious about that part of, you know, my family, you know, will have been slaves. I haven't delved hugely back into my history, but will have been, you know. And so, but I just think it's interesting, that repetition of the separation, really. And so one of the opportunities, I suppose, when I think of legacy and think of my legacy is to break those cycles of separation, or break those cycles of disconnection. And one of the ways I've done that is through the parenting work that I've been doing to help people build those strong attachments in those early years, you know. And I've personally, myself, with my children and how I've been raising them, is with a real attachment parenting model kind of there. And obviously that has been informed by my personal experiences, you know. So yeah, so that's kind of part of the work that I've been doing with my parenting work. And but, you know, it was interesting being invited by Liz to come and be part of these discussions, because I realized I was kind of not sure what it was going to be about. I wasn't sure what to expect, but also there was a bit of an apprehension for me, actually, about engaging and talking about you know, my history. And I think part of that is because, being kind of mixed race, I've always felt like I don't fit in here, I don't fit in there, you know. I'm disconnected from my Black family and the Black community, but also not fitting into the white community that I lived in either, you know, and being separate, being outside, being different. So this kind of in between, you know, is kind of, yeah, that's kind of how I grew up, really, was in between these two worlds and not really fitting into either, in a way. And yeah, and I'm not an academic, so I've written a book, but I'm not an academic either, you know. So it's interesting. I know this group and these discussions are probably driven by people who are academics, yeah, or who are or maybe come from that background. So I noticed in myself these themes of fitting in, these themes of like, how far do I want to go or engage in looking at my history, you know. And what was really interesting, coming to the discussion last week with the lady who talked about the Black History walks that she was doing, it was such an inspiring approach that she has to looking at heritage and, you know, Black history, Black heritage, and the interplay with all the heritage of all the peoples, actually, in the community of whichever area, which I thought was really inspiring. So yeah, so I think that apprehension comes from, you know, not really knowing what to expect and what these discussions will be about. And I'm pretty open, and I'm pretty I'm pretty open, and I'm quite daring and quite I've always been quite a catalyst, I think, and I've done a lot of work, community work, and worked with community groups, and through my background in acting and theatre, and run workshops for women's groups, for asylum seekers, and all kinds of things. So, you know, so I suppose I kind of feel there is a bit of a barrier probably for people engaging in these kind of conversations, and noticing that in myself, and having that awareness that that might be there for others as well, you know. But, you know, when, you know, if, I suppose anybody that's watching this who is unsure of what to expect, you know, through us having this openness and the willingness to have a look, take a look, to see, to engage in conversations, then that, you know, that the world opens up, doesn't it, through these conversations and through learning, and giving things a go, really. So yeah, it would be interesting to hear from other people, because I've told you a bit about me and a bit about my background. It'd be really great to have a chat, you know, have a discussion about some of what I've raised, and people's experience around engagement, and around, you know, disconnection, and some of the themes that I've mentioned so far.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for overcoming your apprehension and being willing to come and join. Simon, you've got your hand there.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is really interesting, and I think it's quite common. So we had, during our summer club at Belong, and this has given us some ideas sort of for the future, but one of the children who came was about 12 years old. Her family originally from Nigeria, and then we were talking about language and things, and she said, but I don't speak Nigerian languages. And that was clearly something that she felt quite strongly, and I engaged with it because, being of Italian origin, but my English mother did not want us to learn our Italian dialect because she felt it was below somehow her expectations. So I think, you know, these are really important issues, because alienation, disconnection from the world around you, and a sense of rootedness, I mean, they're so important for balance in people, in young people and children growing up, and for, you know, for the security in your future life. So I think, yeah, these are things really, really important. And, you know, it might be that we ask you at some point to come and talk to some of our young people, so that they can explore how they can look for their own identity and heritage.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. One of the it reminds me of when I met a woman through an NCT group that I was in when I had, you know, my first baby, and she's Greek originally, and she, you know, but she wasn't speaking to her son in Greek at all. So, you know, he wasn't learning that, and his grandparents don't really speak English. So there was this, it was, you know, difficult when they would come and visit. And I know there is this kind of strong need to kind of progress and fit in and get on with, you know, where you were living, you know, and I felt a real sense of that when, during my childhood, we moved for a while and lived in Germany for a couple of years. And so I had this whole experience of moving to Germany, not speaking the language, learning the language, and really immersed in that. And then not really wanting to speak English as much because of trying to catch up, as it were, and fit in, you know. And then we moved back to Wales, different Mid Wales. That's when we moved to Mid Wales from South Wales. And then I had that experience all over again. And, you know, that this reluctance to speak German because I just need to catch up. I just need to fit in and catch up. And so, but, you know, one of my, when I see people who speak two languages, I think it's such a gift to be bilingual, you know, to have more than one language or, you know, have several languages. And, you know, as a child in that situation, I know very much I was just trying to, you know, catch up really and, you know, fit in. But I didn't really have the opportunity to keep up that language. So, you know, I don't really speak German anymore. My sister was a bit older, so she does actually still speak German. But yeah, there's this you know, I think it's so amazing to be able to have more than one language, and I get that kind of desire to fit in, you know, and yeah, not stand out too much, especially when you already do because you're another color, right?
Yeah, we're still looking though at whether we can bring in some language classes and maybe, I mean, we do have some intergenerational activities already to bring young people and older people together, and language could be one of the ways. Music, heritage, crafts.
Yes.
And some of the young people have said they'd love to engage on traditional crafts and games. Stories, of course, we've done some storytelling as well, but because as you grow older and go out into the world, then those roots become so much more important.
Yeah, and you know, the other thing was my parents split up when I was young as well. I was like 2, and my dad actually grew up with Welsh as his first language. So, and he's mixed race, so his dad was a Black American soldier. So there's a whole other part of, so I've got this Jamaican history and this African American history as well to explore more into. Yeah, and yeah. So sorry, so some people had hands up.
Thank you very much. Beverly's going to come in now, and then I'd love to come in next. Beverly?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's very, very interesting what you have reflected on. I think it is so usual, this idea of dislocation, not fitting in, separate. I think there's 2 ways of looking at it. One, that we often have quite a stereotyped idea of what we should fit into. So there isn't the range of understanding of different ways of being Black that could encompass individual ways. I'm not saying that, you know, there still isn't something to fit into, but maybe we've got it as a kind of quite rigid. I mean, nobody ever quite fits into that because it's quite a caricature that is often conveyed. The other thing I thought was, and this is something that I've been thinking about recently, is the idea of roots. And you need to have roots, and your roots have to be to some extent where you live, where you are located. But that cannot be at the cost of the deeper roots, the sort of grandparent roots and the great grandparent roots. And it's not about children being divided or mixed up or confused. It's about enjoying and claiming your roots here and now and fighting for that to be recognized, and also enjoying knowing that you in no way have to duck or dodge from those perhaps older and deeper roots. Yeah, and I'm thinking it's, you know, life is a difficult balance always.
Yeah.
But it's how you kind of incorporate and pass on that understanding that we can have both.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we must have both.
And I think probably what happened for me, I think, in my kind of drive to kind of fit in with where I was, and, you know, switching languages and stuff, was this sense that you can have one or the other. Do you know what I mean? And so I think it's so great what you're saying, you know, to really, for particularly young people to know you can have both, and you yeah, and you can define yourself the way you want to be. Like, there is no, you know, it's interesting what you're saying about stereotypes, because there are, aren't there, you know, it's really strong stereotypes. So yeah, it's interesting.
I think what both of you are saying is absolutely fascinating, and very, very close to thoughts and ideas that I've had. I don't think there's a term for how I am. I'm half Welsh and I'm half English, but I'm not bilingual. My father didn't think it appropriate. We lived in England, and he wasn't worried about me learning Welsh, even though he was very passionate about his Welsh language. And I think the whole thing about family languages is something that English speaking people, and a sort of English colonial dominance has negated other languages very badly. Now, here in Australia, it's really very obvious. So there's two issues about family languages. One is that the Indigenous people, and I didn't do a welcome to country, which I do sometimes on these sessions, because I'm here, I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I respect and recognise their history. So there's the issue about their languages being protected, and they've only just now started teaching entirely in, doing a pilot, teaching entirely in the first Australian language that's spoken in some part in, I think, Northern Australia. So there's that whole issue. Whereas in New Zealand, Maori is a sort of standardized language, might have different dialects or whatever, but it's a language that you can be a Maori, you can be bilingual Maori English or bilingual Maori anything else. It doesn't work quite the same in Australia, but here we have an exceptionally mixed white community of incoming people. And so we've got Italian people, Greek people, Chinese people, Japanese people, people from all sorts of Indonesia and many other places where people have their own languages. But the Australian way of teaching in schools is to teach in English and ignore all these family languages. And one of the things a friend and I were trying to do was to look at family language heritage and trying to encourage families to value the heritage that they've got. So just as an example, my little granddaughter has me as half Welsh with an interest in Welsh, even though I don't speak it. And I speak English. I don't speak Australian English. And so we have all kinds of hilarious misunderstandings when she, as a 7-year-old, points out to me I'm English and she knows better, she's Australian. The other granny is Dutch. And so Tilly could have learned Dutch because Anne came to Australia as a child speaking Dutch, so she had to learn English. I just think it's a big opportunity missed if you've got a family language which you can then use. Whereas my little granddaughter's learning Japanese in school, which is all very well and good, but we can't help her. And homeschooling, the Japanese bit was a bit of a nightmare. So, but within families, there are those other languages. So I think the whole language issue, we've actually had the new head of the Jamaican Language Unit speak on one session. And he, Joseph Farquharson, and he was really interesting. And we worked with, we being our organisation, which Caroline's a director, and me, Learning Links International, we worked with the Jamaican Language Unit and Professor Hubert Devonish and Jamaican colleagues in the West Midlands, where I was living at the time. And we worked to, I worked in a college and we ran Jamaican language classes, accredited up to A level for people who were Jamaican language speakers. So I don't know, Sarah, do you speak Jamaican?
Not at all, not at all.
Not at all.
And you know, and I think it's great that that is there, and I'm sure when my mum was growing up, when she came to Wales when she was 12, you know, Jamaican, I doubt, was in her world, wasn't recognized as a language, you know, and so yeah,
not sorry to interrupt, not only not recognized as a language, but actually recognized as something derogatory, bad English.
Yes, exactly. So there's kind of shame or around you know, around your accent, around how you speak, and I think that's you know, very, very challenging, and yeah, so
I think it's really interesting. I think as well, when you talked about mixed race, and you also had mentioned before about the your father being mixed race, African American, sorry, American, was American GI.
Yeah,
was his father, yeah. We had Lucy Bland from one of the universities in Cambridge spoke to us, because she's written about brown babies and that Black heritage. That was really interesting as well. And people not, because the brown babies were born to white girls in white areas, because that's where the GIs were based. In fact, I think that there were Black GIs based in my village in Worcestershire, and I'm trying to do some research about that. But the challenges that you face if you're mixed race, about being accepted, and even though I'm half Welsh and half English, when I'm operating in Wales, I sound so English that people wouldn't think I was Welsh, and I can't sort of buy into the real Welsh culture. So did you learn Welsh in Mid Wales?
I did. I learned Welsh in school, but I mean, I learned Welsh in school, a little tiny bit in primary school, and then I had to learn it for 3 years in high school. But for my sister, for instance, when we came back from Germany, she had to learn Welsh in high school for 3 years, but she was fluent in German, and she wasn't able to learn German because the age she was, they didn't teach it at that age, and then they stopped teaching it altogether. But she was fluent, so you know, it kind of, so it's interesting what you say about family languages, but also, you know, having opportunities. I mean, you know, I think that's a bit of a missed opportunity when somebody has a language to be able to continue it. You know, I remember we had a couple of exchange students stay with us, German exchange students stay with us, who, you know, because they didn't have enough families for the exchange students to stay with, so we had a couple. So that worked well, but it, you know, it's a shame she didn't get to continue that language, you know, if it's being taught in the school, but it's just not your age group, you know. But anyway,
But I think there's a really interesting issue that you're bringing up there, and we're just wasting skills that children have got and they're not able to accredit them. So children who've got other languages, like Simon's saying, you know, he was Italian speaking. Have you got Italian GCSE then, Simon?
No, the problem is my mother wouldn't let us learn the dialects, which we would have learned in the with our grandparents. So I've only learned, I could understand Italian, or I can still understand dialects, but speaking it is hard because we were encouraged not to. So this is one of the challenges.
This was the challenge that we wanted to take up here in Australia, was by calling it family languages, it would be any language that was part of the family, either heritage or circumstance, that, you know, if you'd lived somewhere else, because when people are refugees and asylum seekers, sometimes they have to learn different languages. And I can remember we had a student who came, forgive me, it's a long time ago. He was an African student who'd then lived in Norway, I think, and spoke Norwegian. And then he came to Wales and spoke Welsh. He spoke Norwegian and Welsh. He didn't speak English, and he spoke his African languages as well. And when you've got people with such complex language histories, what really would be good would be for schools to recognise the languages that the children have around them at home, and to support parents to recognise and value those languages, the potential of learning those languages or already knowing them. Like you, Simon, you'd have been fully fluent in Italian and English, it wouldn't have been a problem. But here, in Australia, there's a big drive from people my age who came here, retired age people now who are grandparents, not to let their children speak their family languages, because they wanted so much for them to integrate into the Australian society.
And that's what it is, you know, that's what it's about, is that integration, isn't it? And but
Okay.
you know, it's a shame for that to come at the cost of you know, speaking those family languages, or engaging in, you know, part of your family heritage as well, you know.
Yes. So well, Audrey, you've just come back on with your picture. Did you want to make a comment on anything that we've been talking about?
Yes, please.
Good.
I'm just looking at the title of the talk. You know, it says "Growing Up Disconnected from Black History and Community." So it seems to me it's about other things than just language. And I'm just wondering if Sarah's read this. Have you read Sugar and Slate by Charlotte Williams?
I haven't, no.
She grew up in North Wales, and her father's from Guyana.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it's, I think it was 2009. It's, 2002, but it's really, really well worth reading. And that's a book that really inspired me, because I got such a feeling from reading that book, how she was longing for belonging. And longing for a Black history in Wales. And that started me out. Every time I noticed anything about Black history in North Wales, I'd start writing it down. And I'm sort of in the process of writing an article about it, but I broke my shoulders, so it kind of put me off for a while. But I mean, how did you ever think about there being a Black history in Mid Wales when you lived there?
Not particularly, actually, because, you know, I left when I was 18, and I was just absorbed in what I was interested in, you know, which was, for me, was theatre and dance, and, you know, so, you know, my time was spent, you know, at school or doing theatre or doing dance, and so I didn't, you know, I didn't think much about Black history or my Black history when I was young.
I think what I was getting at, would it have made a difference to you if you'd known there was there were stories going back to the 1600s in your area as well?
Yeah, well, if it
well
was
as the heritage?
if it was taught at school or something, if they would have brought a connection, and got me thinking about it, sooner than as an adult. But yeah, I didn't know any stories from around that area, yeah. And so the lady last week who was talking about the stories from Handsworth in Birmingham and stuff, like knowing some of the history in your area, I think is so interesting, isn't it? But yeah, as a child, I wasn't massively interested in history, to be honest. Although having said that, it's interesting because I was interested in theatre. We did a show with my youth theatre that was about the last woman to be hanged in Wales, Mary Morgan, and that was really interesting. That was really interesting. Engaging in it through that medium, though, for me, through dance or theatre, was, I suppose, my connection with things, drew me in to be interested in things. So I think there's also ways of things, being interesting. And but I was talking with Liz when we had a chat, a couple of weeks ago now, it probably is, isn't it, that I did my theatre work has brought me to some really interesting stories. And one of them was I did a tour in schools with two stories, and one of them was Nanny of the Maroons, was one of the stories, which I hadn't realized till I was talking to my mum more recently, and she was talking, because I've been writing this book, and I was chatting with her, and she told me a little bit about her childhood and how her family used to go to the Blue Mountains in the summer on holiday every year, because that's kind of where they sort of came from in Jamaica. So they would go back to the Blue Mountains, and then that got me thinking, gosh, I could be connected with her, and I don't even know, but she could be in my lineage, which I think is so interesting. So I was in schools educating people about how her journey and her fight with freeing the slaves in Jamaica, and I didn't know that I had a closer connection to that area in the Blue Mountains than I had realized, So and that's in Wolverhampton, I was touring in Wolverhampton.
That's absolutely fascinating, because Natalie Fagan-Brown was going to join us today, but she's not with us. But she has Maroon heritage, and she came as an adult to work in schools in Birmingham. But Yasser Safari, who's a Jamaican poet who joins us on occasions, his latest track is about the Abeng. It's about the Maroons. So maybe we'll share that one in a week or so. That would be good.
Yeah, that'd be lovely.
We'll be here too. So it would be interesting, that heritage and the stories. And of course, Nanny of the Maroons is a national hero in Jamaica, a national heroine rather. The heroes and sheroes, but she's the only shero. Yeah, that's really, really fascinating. Okay, then. So have we got any other points?
Questions or reflections?
Yes. Because you're based in Edinburgh now, are you?
I am based in Edinburgh, yes. So
I saw Sarah's, why I contacted you was because you were with Professor Sir Jeff Palmer.
Yes.
And he's done some amazing work in Edinburgh, and recently with the Dundas statue.
Yes.
And there's now a plaque explaining what Dundas did in terms of not supporting Black people. That's the easiest way of putting it, but it describes in detail. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, and that's
so
where I met him, by the statue, you know, by the plaque. That's where I met him. So I went to a Black History Month event, and I took my daughter as well, you know. So it was great to hear him speak and have a chat with him as well. I didn't know who he was when I had a chat with him before his talk. This was. And yeah, it was great to meet him and hear about the amazing work that he's been doing for many years. Yeah, really inspiring.
I think one of the things that I'd like to do, and we haven't got either Martin or John, who often join us, who are people who've worked for a long time, like it sounds as if Beverly and Joy, you have as well, and Audrey, is to recognise the achievements of people and to have those stories of people who are campaigners for specifically to raise awareness and understanding about Black history. So that's certainly one of the things that's in my mind with all the other things. When you were talking earlier, I think it was can't remember who was saying this. Sorry. About dislocation and not fitting in, and this is something that really does need, people do need help, because it's not easy to just fit in somewhere else. I mean, I'm busy trying to fit in here in Australia. Anyway, over to I'll take Beverly, you next.
I think Caroline's had a question as well. Did you want to?
Oh, I was just writing it in the chat. I was just saying about, it was on the news yesterday that the full-length portrait of Picton has been taken down from the Museum of Wales in Cardiff because of his links with slavery and his treatment of the enslaved people on his plantations. And he'd always been hailed as a hero from the Battle of Waterloo. But he's gone. They've taken him down.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting as well with the Dundas statue and the statue being there, but actually having a clearer representation of that person. You know, I think that's quite interesting. You know, having a plaque that's actually representative rather than, you know, a version of that's inaccurate.
Yeah.
So
or taking away the statue and not recognizing or remembering that person's role in history. Beverly, will I ask you next?
Thank you. Was it, sorry, could I just check, did Caroline talk about the Picton statue?
Yes.
Picton portrait.
Okay, thanks a lot, because of course we have Picton Street in Trinidad, so that's interesting.
Yeah,
okay, yes, same bloke. Right. I wanted to talk just to ask for if anybody, it may be something that could be circulated. I'm currently, in fact, I'm in the middle of doing it now. I'm rewriting a chapter on enslavement and the challenges of teaching it, and the fact that the way we teach it often has a negative impact on the descendants of those who were enslaved, and the care needed to teach it, and the fact that in a way that so much of our work on decolonizing the curriculum or whatever has become focused on enslavement or in statues to do with enslavement. So it's kind of interesting how we have, it's kind of quite a narrow focus in a way. It's understandable and it's important, but it is a narrow focus. So anyway, this chapter I'm writing is about the teaching of enslavement. So if anybody has any examples or references, my email is in the chat and I would appreciate it. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Well, I think there's so much, and I think we can talk some more. One of the things that's happening in these chats is that people are making links, and people are helping and supporting one another across the 4 countries of the UK. We haven't had much link with people in Ireland yet, but I think there's a huge big story there that we have to understand Irish history first before we can begin to connect with the Black Irish history. So that's really important. So yes, certainly we will. We've also been talking about indentured labour, Beverly, because that's a subject that's not even on the curriculum to talk about. And the problem is with teachers thinking they've got to teach about Black history, that we've also, in the past, I've taught Black history in colleges and schools for goodness knows when, and managed programs for Black history, Black History Month, but we were in the early days concentrating on American Black history because Black History Month came from America. So the examples and the stories were all about Black history from America. And now we're beginning in England to have enough Black stories in England, Black history, to be telling those stories, and particularly the local stories. It's so valuable. Beverly, are you trying to come in again?
No, but I'm just happy, Liz, if you have any information about what you thought and how you thought about it in the context of enslavement, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Audrey, thank you. Audrey?
Hello. No, I just talking about, I mean, I was, when I came on this conversation, I was thinking about this disconnection from Black history and community, and it reminded me of when Beverly and I met. It must have been in the mid 1970s or the late 1970s. We belonged to an organization called Harmony, and we were basically trying, it was a multiracial group, but it was mainly made up of mixed race families, and it was really helpful and supportive in helping us deal with our, you know, to give our children this sense of belonging that I was talking about, the sense of being happy in their skin, not happy in their skin, but what's the word, secure, and not feeling intimidated, you know, because they were different, because, you know, if you lived in an all white area. And it just, I don't know whether, I think there is still an organisation called People in Harmony, which developed out of Harmony, but I don't know about Beverly, whether she felt it, but I felt there was such a lot of strength in that organisation. And we learnt history. We were teaching our kids Black history in the you know, at the end of the 1970s. And trying, I mean, in my particular case, my husband didn't pass on to my son his home language, which was a great shame, but he'd lived in England for so long, he almost felt he was born here, so he couldn't really remember to speak it fluently, but that's just a separate story. But I'd just like to get Beverly to say what she thinks about those years in Harmony.
Oh, just to say they were very, very valuable years. And just two things, I mean, I have recently been in touch with People in Harmony, you know, the outgrowth of it. But two things I remember, I mean, well, maybe three. One, I used to actually, I suppose that's what started my interest. I used to teach Black history versions of it in kind of in fun ways to groups of children all that time ago. It was so important to our children. We lived in Hull at the time, that I remember my daughter saying, what we need to do is to buy a big house and have a family from Harmony on every floor. So that we could, you know, we could chat and engage with each other. But I just want to share with you something I gained that has never left me from the very first meeting I went with Harmony, where Carol Carnell, the founder, was there. And she talked about the proportion of books with Black children in your home. And she said, if you have 2 books out of all the books you have, you are doing nothing. Any nursery, any playgroup will have 2 books. You have to have over 50%. And I have tried with my children to have had about 80% of the books in our house had Black children or other elements of diversity. And I think it was something that most people don't realize, that, you know, children will actually pick up the book around them. And if most of those books haven't got them represented, that's the image they'll have. And it's not enough to have a few. We've got to shift for our children. That's all.
I think Carol was absolutely marvelous. She took me once to her children's school, which was a very multiracial school in South London, and she said, come and have a look what's on the walls and see what you think. So again, there's issues about having pictures on your own walls, right? But we went in there and there was this big poster near the door, welcome, and the teachers had put this picture with about 50 different people on it, because I counted them, and the only one that wasn't white was somebody, a Native American with a big war bonnet on. And this was in a mixed race, a really mixed area in South London. I mean, Carol used to fume, and we're also very keen about Black greeting cards, or greeting cards with Black kids on, with, you know, different ethnicities, and that's what got started us into selling Black greeting cards in the end of the 1970s as well. Black, and we eventually ventured out into Asian and all kinds of different things, but it was all Carol. She was a total inspiration.
Well, she sounds great. Is she still around, Carol?
No, I'm afraid she died.
Oh. Well, this is what I mean. You know, there's been some really, really good things that went on in the past, and I think those of us who are still around need to share them and get together and share them with people like Sarah. And
I mean, that representation is it's really important. And you saying Beverly is maybe saying, oh gosh, how many books do I have actually on my shelf, you know? And, you know, I have a whole parenting community. Like, I have 1,700 people in my parenting group, right? So I do have a whole kind of parenting community. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting, you know, to think about those things, isn't it? And ask those questions, actually. Yeah.
I think in families need perhaps to take, or be supported to take responsibility for valuing, for example, family languages. We've talked about that. Yeah. But also about teaching Black history, because no school is going to teach Black history in any great depth. But if family take responsibility through a family learning approach, I'm from an education background, and in adult literacy work, we used to do a lot on family learning. And if you did family learning about Black history, helping and understand things in your own area, but helping people to be able to see how they can do that themselves. Like, you know, you said, Sarah, you went to hear the talk that was going on, you know, about the statue, and finding out in other ways, and, you know, encouraging local history groups to explore into the Black history of their area. I think those are really, you know, they're possibilities, aren't they?
And in our own families, this is the thing as well. And this is what, you know I can do more of, is to have conversations. Like, I think often families aren't having these conversations, and I know I haven't intergenerationally in my family either, you know. So it's finding those opportunities. And I have a podcast called the Legacy Life Podcast, which you know, I'm always interested in having conversations with people on there, if anybody's ever interested in that as well. But one of the things I was thinking of doing is actually interviewing my parents, you know, to talk about their heritage and my heritage, you know, and make time for some of these conversations and share them, you know. Partly because I have a platform to do that with as well, you know. But yeah.
There's so many things to share here. Just to say that we set up the nurse trainers anti-racist network. It's called ITARN now, and yes. Look, Beverly.
So was I, and it was fantastic. Where's that gone now? Is it still operating?
Well, I don't know, but I think it ought to be revived because, I mean, it was just brilliant. And that book that was produced by ITARN was just amazing. All my materials are in Wales. Caroline can maybe find the book. She's got my book collection at the moment. So that's really interesting. So I think we've, I don't know, I just think sometimes it happens in these conversations and in other times in life when you just get the right people together. Now, it's interesting because we haven't got the range of people that we may sometimes get on these conversation sessions, but this has been the first real conversation that we've had, you know, all talking together. Yes, Sarah, you led it, but you led it knowing that you were going to lead into a conversation, whereas we've had presenters before.
Oh, I thought it was a discussion, so that's what I picked up as a discussion.
Simon.
Sorry, that was just applause, not a raised hand.
Oh, right. Okay, lovely. Well, great applause. Well, I think what I'd like to do now is, Beverly?
Sorry, just a quick one. I'm thinking of what Sarah said. I think in terms of interviewing the older generations, it is so important and so precious while you still have them.
Yeah.
No time has to be lost. But we also have to think through that sometimes they have buried things in their heart because of that feeling of loss and pain. And that's why they're not talking about it. It's not to put you off. Sometimes it's because they don't think it's important, but sometimes it's just too painful what they've lost.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, and there is that aspect of being mindful of that, yeah, and gentle with that, yeah.
Yes, I think that's important. There's been so much focus on Windrush and the Windrush generations, obviously recently in the UK. But one of the things that hasn't been looked at, we've checked with our Jamaican colleagues, is those people who are left behind. And there's a whole lot of really interesting stories. But in a way, what you're saying, Beverly, is that pain in people's hearts because of what they left behind. And I think that's really fascinating. Now, I'm going to just thank you so much, Sarah. That was just a brilliant catalyst to get us going with this really good conversation that we've had today. And I think there's lots more things, and I will share everybody's email address if you all agree. You're all happy with that, are you?
Yeah, I'm very happy, and you know, you're all very welcome to come to my book launch if people are interested in coming to that. It's on the 22nd. I did put the link in the comments.
Yes.
And something that I'm doing in the lead up to that over the next couple of weeks is it's called Random Acts of Awakening. So it's really connecting with people in different ways with the intention of inspiring, empowering and educating. So which are the themes that come through in the book, and inviting people with their different communities. So I'm sort of guiding people through that in my group. So if anybody is interested in taking part in that as well, I'll be hosting that in my Facebook group if anybody's interested in Random Acts of Awakening. So
okay, well, thank you so much, Sarah. Now I'm just going to share the screen to look at this. I've put together a PowerPoint, which I've been trying to do over the weeks, and I apologized earlier because this isn't the full PowerPoint I was going to present. I can't find, you know, you can be working on two versions of the same things. Well, I've not had a very good week this week, and that's my excuse. Okay, so I'm just going to just talk through these. So thank you very much. Growing up disconnected from Black history and community. You were so honest in what you shared, Sarah, and life's not easy, and your life certainly has been complicated with the different places that you've lived. So each week I try and do a poster that people can share around on social media and things. But thank you, Sarah. Right, so this is from Australia. So I'm finding it really fascinating being here with a large television screen in the latest rented place we're living in. We had a disaster a few weeks ago in June. And we live in the national park in the forest, and the trees all fell down and our house was destroyed. So I've been living in different rented accommodation and I'm settled now for a little while. Anyway, here in Australia, there's been a series on called Stuff the British Stole. Well, it's hilarious, but it's really punchy and telling the story of British colonialism in a from a different perspective, and I think that's really really interesting. This was about a particular clip that I put there was about a particular story when a shield was dropped, and it's now in a display in the British Museum, and yet it goes back to the invasion of the continent of Australia by the British and the power they had because they had guns, they had weapons. So that's a link there. Now, I can't do it on this, showing it to you now, but if I send you this PowerPoint, or if I post the PowerPoint on the website and you open it as your own PowerPoint, then these links are live. That was some real learning. Okay, so tomorrow, Caroline and I and other members of the North Wales Jamaica Society have a Zoom session. This is going to be at 9 o'clock in the morning in Jamaica and 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Wales. And we have our meetings now once a month for North Wales Jamaica Society. And we're working on a project that links the history of North Wales and Penrhyn Castle with the village of Pennants in Jamaica, and we're working on a reparation project, which is interesting. So you'd be very welcome. I thought I'd just add it onto this. Now, you talked about books. Now, children's books is another whole area, and Caroline presented some examples earlier in the week. We actually run a Black History Book Club on Wednesday mornings. I've been in lockdown for so long that these things have kept me going, and it's been really interesting. So that slide has got the collection of books I have here and out of the libraries here. You can see on the whatever side it is, right hand side of the screen, I think, The Tolerant Nation. That's written by Charlotte Williams, and Charlotte Williams was working over here at one of the universities. She's retired from that now, and she went back to Wales to lead on the work to be done to embed Black history into the curriculum. And we've mentioned quite a lot about that at different times. So it's been great to have this discussions about all these books. I think we've talked about all of them at different times during the 40 odd sessions. But what I've realized is that it's difficult to find, for example, the session when Lawrence Scott spoke about his book Dangerous Freedom, about Bell, so we need to be able to cross-reference this and sort of have an index of what's was spoken about in different sessions. Okay, so this is the sort of thing I normally do, is that if I see something coming up, or if the wonderful Audrey sends me something that's coming up, then I put it onto this PowerPoint so that people can have a look at it, linking on Eventbrite or whatever, and find out. So this one's about an audio drama talking about the reparation of people from the British West Indies in 1920s Liverpool. So that'll be an interesting one that's coming up. And then what I'm finding is that most of these things that are posted and you can book in on Eventbrite, if you go to we can find out from the organisers, and they're posted somewhere, so that's interesting. Now this is a really interesting, this is out of the Times, because I can get that online and people send me links to it as well. And there's this article about a third of the National Trust properties tainted by slave trade money, which is an article in the Times. And this video by Mercy McCokie is just really fascinating, putting the Black Lives Matter thing back into context. And then there was also an article, I'm going back up the page here, about Labour MP called racist by Priti Patel. Anyway, so there's other things to look at there. Then I've been following up a link that we've got with Teo Alokoa, a writer, singer, actor and producer from Nigeria, and he'd been he's had a real focus on the stories of Paul Robeson, and Paul Robeson performed in the UK and supported all kinds of initiatives in the UK, and in Wales particularly he's remembered for the significant support he gave to people who were struggling and campaigning, and so this is out of the Guardian, because the Guardian website's also got really interesting articles on as well. And this was about Black British before Windrush, and the story of people in Liverpool who their family heritage living in Liverpool goes way back. So that's a really interesting story, and there's a good clip there. And then this statue of Betty Campbell. Last week I showed a picture of the statue. This is an iPlayer episode, Betty Campbell statue for a heroine. So that's another interesting link. And then this is of interest to me, this book that was written 50 years ago, How the West Indian Child Was Made Educationally Subnormal in the British School System. A lot of my educational colleagues, particularly John, is looking at this this story, and so this was yesterday, but when we get the links, then I'll be putting the links to the recording. So this just says more about the 50th anniversary edition, and the introduction I thought was interesting because I actually know people here. And this is the edition, sorry, of the book. So in the edition, Paul McNee, who did a lot of work in the University and College Union when I used to work in colleges. Of course, we've all heard of Jeremy Corbyn, and interesting to get his perspective there. And then the final one, 50 years on, Hubert Devenish, he's the Professor of Linguistics at the University of the West Indies, and he did a lot of work to support efforts to challenge the treatment of or consideration. And Professor Hubert Devenish went to the Court of Regents in New York to challenge the fact that so many Jamaican children were going through their screening system, school screening system in New York, and being put in special schools. We had a similar sort of situation in the UK. And when Professor Sir Jeff Palmer speaks, he talks about the fact that when he came from Jamaica as a 15-year-old, first of all, he was put into special education classes, so we call it now. So that's just a little taste of some of the sorts of things that I include on there. And I'm just sorry, Audrey, that I did all this lovely work and couldn't find it, so share that maybe next week. But it takes up quite a long time to go through all the many things that are going on. But anyway, hope that was useful. Okay, so I think if we wind up the recording there, if that's all right, Simon.